Hi everyone, it's John. I have another book review for you today. This is a book that I read in February and March of this year and really had to sort of sit on it and think about it for a little bit. Earlier this year I was in the mood for something a little bit intellectually meaty and heavy, I guess, even more than usual. So I decided to pick up a big German modernist novel. And it's not by one of the usual suspects. It's not Thomas Mann, it's not Robert Musil, it's not Rainer Maria Rilke. He didn't really write any large novels. Not Kafka. But it's by the one who probably gets the least attention. It's by Hermann Broch. I read this. I read The Sleepwalkers. By still getting used to holding this in front of a camera. The Sleepwalkers. This translation by Michael Tanner. And there you go. Hermann Broch. Put out by Quartet Encounters. There you go. So like I said, usually Broch is today not one of the big names that comes to mind when you think of German modernist writers. He usually gets overshadowed by some of the people that I mentioned earlier. But this novel was published in Germany in 1932 under the original title Die Schlafwandler. And it is a trilogy of 3 novels, actually. And it shares between the 3 of them some of the same really big philosophical themes as you're probably used to if you've read any German modernist novels by any of the other writers. History, thinking about history, love, will, meaning, the meaning of life, all of these tremendously huge questions. And it's written in 3 distinct episodes in time, and for the most part, 3 distinct casts of characters as well. However, a couple of the characters overlap. The first episode takes place in 1888. The second one, 15 years later, in 1903, and the third one, 15 more years later, in 1918. So the first episode, like I said, we are in the year 1888. It centers on a character by the name of Joachim von Passenau and his 2 romantic interests. His visceral, passionate love for a Czech prostitute by the name of Rucina, and his cooler, more class-interested, duty-driven love toward a young aristocrat by the name of Elizabeth. He finds solace in the traditions of his military service and the beliefs of his Lutheran church. Out of obligation, he ends up feeling the need to marry Elizabeth, but they don't immediately consummate their marriage. The second episode is called The Anarchist, and it revolves around an uneasy bookkeeper by the name of August Esch. Esch's friend, who is a socialist who operates a labor union, is thrown into jail, and Esch blames a local successful business owner and publicly claims that he's a homosexual. Esch has really big fantastical dreams about beginning a vulgar sort of theatrical show in which female wrestlers and dancers wear next to nothing while they beat each other senseless. That's kind of what I got from the text. It's kind of weird. Like von Passenau, Esch feels ambivalent about the values of the world in which he lives in, but tries to look for a scapegoat instead. And finally, part 3, The Realist, set in 1918, bring together the aging von Passenau from part 1 and Esch from the second story. And they tell their story as illness and war slowly ravage the city that they live in. Esch ends up taking over at a local newspaper and tries to cobble together some meaning in his life, but is unclear how successful he is actually being at that. There are several scenes in part 3 with exhausted, distraught doctors having to inform young, shell-shocked soldiers that they will need amputations or worse. Remember, part 3 is in 1918, so we are at the height of World War I. In the final pages of the third part of the novel, Major von Passenau is nearly killed by a set of town rioters. If this is an allegory, I guess, for what Broch thought was happening to the heart and soul of his Germany before his very eyes, it's sort of hard to imagine how he even had the energy to drag himself out of bed in the morning. I guess a lot of people in the United States in the year 2020 might be feeling the same thing. But the decadence, the depravity, the unalloyed evil of people and their motivations is on full display in the novel. And I don't want to say that the novel is an allegory for the German political and cultural scene. That might, and almost certainly is too simple of a reading about what's going on, but it is a small part, at least a little bit of that, because it's just too uncanny to not be. As one might expect of a capacious German modernist novel written nearly 100 years ago in the last year of the Weimar Republic, actually, 1932. The Sleepwalkers seems to be about the dissolution of an increasingly decadent Germany, as seen through the morally problematic nature of people's choices and behaviors in each of the 3 stories. Of course, what Broch experienced in the interwar years was the utter and total inability of the German political class to deal with their own problems. And this novel is mostly a fictional distillation of that set of angsts, turbulences, and disappointments. In this sense, it very much digs up much of the well-worn literary territory that writers of this time, that being the years leading up to World War I and the interwar years, were really obsessed with and possessed by. And if none of this wasn't already eerie enough, Broch goes on to play political prognosticator and does so with creepy accuracy. At least where nonfiction is concerned, playing political prognosticator is usually a mug's game, but Broch, or at least the narrator of the novel, predicts the rise of a brutal demagogue. Remember, this is in 1932. Predicts the rise of a brutal demagogue who will foretell a new future for Germany. Reading these words remains one of the most bizarre, tingly experiences, downright uncanny, as Freud would have said, unheimlich, literary experiences that I've recently had, because it was just so. It's like he was looking into the future. It was unusual. Of course, if there's anything that can ruin an otherwise perfectly enjoyable reading experience, it's a translation with which, for whatever reason, I can't find any sense of readerly synchronicity. And unfortunately, this was one of those times. I have personally no German whatsoever, aside from the occasional word here or there. It's nearly impossible for me to tell whether I just dislike the translation or whether I simply wasn't in the mood for it at the time. But whatever the case, I found the language kind of turgid, a bit overblown and flowery and purple prose, especially in the parts that discussed philosophy, love, art, and the other quote-unquote big themes. So when you have this big, sort of showy, fluffed up purple prose, and you're also talking about, the philosophy of history or something, it really comes together to create a perfect storm of boredom. And and Broch just happens to be one of those writers where he doesn't digress for a page or two on the nature of music or love or whatever. It's 10 pages, it's 20 pages at a time. And had the prose been more successful for me, that would have been a wonderful reading experience. But, like I said, it was less than successful. To think that this was Broch's debut novel, and it was, is kind of incredible. He was, even if he was in his mid-40s when it was first published, it does a really tremendous job at capturing a particular spirit, particular Geist, at a precise moment in history. And this would be something I would love to revisit again in the years to come, but probably not in this translation that assumes that big ideas have to be written about in big, overblown, florid language, or that just happens to write about them in big, overblown, florid language. If anyone knows of a better translation, please let me know. If you have read Hermann Broch and his novel, Der Schlafwandler. I'm also thinking about reading his other famous novel called The Death of Virgil. Let me know out there if anyone has read that one as well. If anyone has, I know it's my viewers. So leave a comment below, as always, and I will see you later. Bye.